5 million hours of labor, moved basket by basket, on human backs, with no wheel and no draft animals, 72 feet of earth piled into the shape of a bird in flight, a mound taller than a 6-story building, 6 concentric ridges curving for 3/4 of a mile, a half-circle amphitheater facing a river that no longer runs. This is Poverty Point, P-A-H-Verti Point, in northeast Louisiana, built around 3,700 years ago, 1,000 years before the Olmec raised their first pyramid, 1,500 years before the Maya carved a single glyph. And the people who built it had no farms, no villages of mud brick, no kings. They were hunter-gatherers. For most of the 20th century, one idea governed American archaeology. It seemed common sense. It turned out to be wrong. The idea was simple. Monuments require agriculture. Agriculture produces surplus. Surplus feeds specialists. Specialists build temples. No agriculture, no monuments. That was the rule. It came from Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley. It fit everywhere, except here, except in a bend of the Bayou Mason, on a low rise above a river delta. Because Poverty Point breaks every part of that equation, and it does so 1,000 years too early. In the next 20 minutes, you will see a city that should not exist, built by people who refuse the rules. You will stand on earthworks that match the pyramids for effort, if not for height. You will trace a trade network larger than modern France. You will meet a society that had everything archaeologists said it could not have. No farming, no metal, no writing. And at the end, you will face the deepest mystery of all. After 600 years of construction, they walked away. They left the ridges, they left the Great Mound, they left the trade stones, and nobody to this day knows why. This is one of the most important archaeological sites in North America. Most Americans have never heard its name. To understand what Poverty Point is, you first have to understand where it sits and what surrounds it. Northeast Louisiana, on a narrow strip of higher ground. To the west, the Mississippi floodplain. To the east, rolling uplands. 3,500 years ago, the climate was warmer than today, wetter. The bayous ran full all year. Fish spawned in the backwaters by the ton. Migratory waterfowl darkened the sky every autumn. Deer moved through cane thickets. Nut trees, hickory, pecan, oak, blanketed the higher ground. Roots and tubers grew thick in the wet soil. This was one of the richest non-agricultural environments on Earth, a place where gathering, fishing, and hunting could feed thousands. The people who lived here did not need to farm. The land farmed itself. All they had to do was harvest. And because the food came every year on a predictable schedule, they could stay, they could settle, they could build. This is the first thing Poverty Point teaches. The old rule had it backwards. Settlement did not require agriculture, it required abundance. And in this one narrow corner of Louisiana, 3,500 years ago, abundance arrived in overwhelming quantity. The site was recognized in 1873. A local planter noticed strange ridges on his land. He called his plantation Poverty Point. The name was grim. The soil was thin. The earthworks made plowing difficult. The plantation failed. The ridges survived. For decades, no one understood what they were. Most people assumed they were natural, low swells of sediment left by old floods. Then in 1952, an aerial photograph was taken by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And everything changed. From the air, the pattern leapt out. 6 massive ridges nested one inside another, forming a half circle facing a bayou. Nothing in nature produces a geometry like that. This was built by people, by design, and the scale was staggering. The outermost ridge measured 3/4 of a mile across. A modern city block would fit inside one segment of it. Each ridge stood 4 to 6 feet high in its original form. Each was nearly 100 feet wide at the base, and there were 6 of them, concentric, perfectly spaced, divided into sections by 4 or 5 radial corridors leading outward. An archaeologist later calculated the Earth moved to build the ridges alone. The number defied belief. Remember that number, we'll come back to it. The ridges were only the beginning. Just beyond the westernmost ridge rose the Great Mound. The locals called it Mound A. Its official name today is the Bird Mound. From the air, its shape is clear. A great effigy, 72 feet tall, wings spread to either side, head facing west, tail trailing east, a bird in flight, or possibly an owl or a hawk. The interpretation is debated. What is not debated is the scale. 72 feet is the height of a modern 7-story building. The base covers 700 by 600 feet of ground. And the most astonishing fact about Mound A, radiocarbon dates suggest it was built in as little as 90 days. 90 days, 3 months, a single construction season. Thousands of people working together, carrying earth in woven baskets. No agriculture supported them. No centralized state compelled them. No metal tools shaped the baskets or the digging sticks. Just bodies, just will, just a shared purpose that pulled labor on a scale archaeology had not imagined possible for hunter-gatherers. And if you want more of these forgotten stories from before Columbus, stay with us. This is only the beginning. Now let me give you the number I promised. The total Earth moved at poverty point to build every mound and ridge. Roughly 1 million cubic yards, moved by hand, in baskets that held maybe 50 pounds of soil each. That works out to roughly 5 million person-hours of labor, spread across generations, across families, across centuries. Compare it to Stonehenge. Poverty Point moved more earth than Stonehenge moved stone, by a factor of several times over. Compare it to Watson Break, the older Louisiana site. Poverty Point's earthworks dwarf Watson Break by an order of magnitude. For 1,500 years, Poverty Point was the largest earthwork complex anywhere in the Americas, north, central, or south. Nothing in Mesoamerica matched it in 3,500 years ago. The Olmec centers were 1,000 years away. Nothing in the Andes matched it. The great coastal mound sites of Peru were contemporaries, but smaller. Poverty Point was the largest construction project in the Western Hemisphere, and it was built by people who had never sown a seed, so who actually lived here, and how many of them? This is where the picture becomes even stranger. Archaeologists estimate the permanent population at several hundred, possibly up to 1,000 people living on the ridges year-round. But the site hosted gatherings far larger. During peak seasons, possibly 4,000 or 5,000. Some estimates run higher. For 3,500 years ago, in North America, those numbers are extraordinary. Most archaic period camps held a few dozen people. Poverty Point was something different. A center, a gathering place, a magnet for people from across the lower Mississippi Valley. And the ridges themselves were residential. Families lived on top of them. Houses of bent saplings covered in grass and hide. The radial corridors between ridge segments were streets, paths for moving between the sectors of the settlement. The half-circle opening faced east, toward the bayou, toward the sunrise, toward water and travel and the rising sun. This was not a temple, not a palace. It was a town, a hunter-gatherer town, laid out with geometric precision. And then there are the objects, the things the people of Poverty Point made, the things they imported, the things they left behind. Millions, literally millions, of small baked clay objects, shaped by hand, fire-hardened, about the size of a walnut. Archaeologists call them Poverty Point objects, or PPOs. Their function was unknown for decades. The answer turned out to be cooking. This region has no stone suitable for making boiling stones. The soil is alluvial, river mud, deep and stoneless. So the people of Poverty Point made their own. They shaped clay into balls, grooved them, baked them in fires. Then they dropped the hot clay into pits lined with hide. The pits held water and food. The hot clay cooked the meal. A stoneless land solved by invention. Thousands of these objects have been excavated. They are the signature of the culture. But the clay cooking balls are only the domestic layer. The imported objects tell a much larger story. Poverty Point sat at the center of a trade network that stretched across a third of the North American continent. Copper, hammered from pure nuggets, arriving from the upper Great Lakes, 1,500 miles to the north. Galena, lead ore, sparkling and heavy, from the Ozarks and the upper Mississippi Valley. Steatite, a soft carvable stone perfect for bowls, from the southern Appalachians, 800 miles to the east. Novaculite and quartz crystal from Arkansas, chert from the Tennessee River Valley, hematite from the Missouri uplands, gray flint from the Ohio River, magnetite from farther north. Stone after stone, traveling hundreds of miles by river and foot. These were not casual exchanges. The volume is too great. Tens of thousands of imported stone artifacts have been excavated. This was systematic, organized, sustained across centuries. A hunter-gatherer trade network on a continental scale. No writing recorded the transactions, no state enforced the routes. And yet the goods moved reliably year after year. Remember, no wheels, no horses, no draft animals of any kind. Everything moved by dugout canoe or on human backs. The trade goods raise a question no one has fully answered. What did Poverty Point send back? What was Poverty Point producing that was worth copper from the Great Lakes and steatite from the Smokies? The archaeological record is thin on outgoing goods. Organic materials don't survive 3,500 years in wet Louisiana soil. But the candidates are strong. Salt from the Gulf Coast salines, smoked fish, dried meat, alligator hides, shells, cane and reed products, dyes, baskets, medicinal plants from the swamps, things that simply rot away, leaving no trace. And perhaps something else, something harder to trade but harder to refuse. Ceremony, ritual access, the right to gather here. Pilgrimage is a form of trade. People travel far to stand in a place that matters. They bring gifts, they leave changed. Poverty Point may have been, in part, a pilgrimage center, a place people came to from 1,000 miles away. That would explain the seasonal surges in population, the geometric grandeur of the ridges. The effort poured into Mound A. And now consider what the people of Poverty Point did not have. The list is as staggering as what they built. No domesticated plants, no maize, no beans, no squash cultivation on any scale. Wild food sustained everything. No pottery for most of their history. Only at the very end do crude ceramics appear. No wheel for any purpose, no metal tools. Only cold hammered ornamental copper from the north, never sharpened into blades. No writing system, no numerical record, no inscriptions, no glyphs. Not a single mark meant to carry meaning across time. No draft animals, no horses, no oxen, no beasts of burden of any kind. Just human shoulders, human baskets, human will, no bow and arrow. It had not yet reached North America in force. The atlatl, lat-ul, was still the weapon of choice. No mortared walls, no quarried stone, no fired brick architecture. Everything built from earth and wood and bound fiber. And yet they moved 1 million cubic yards of soil. They imported goods from 1,000 miles away. They built a city. How did they organize it? That is the question archaeologists return to again and again. There is no evidence of a king, no elite burials, no palace, no throne, no royal iconography anywhere on the site. The houses on the ridges are roughly equivalent in size. No great chief's residence sits above the rest. This was apparently an egalitarian society, or close to it. Decisions made by consensus, by lineage heads, by shared tradition, which makes the scale of Poverty Point even stranger. Massive public works, without a monarch to command them. Every known pre-modern monument of this scale was built under centralized authority. Pyramids, ziggurats, temple mounds, palaces. Poverty Point was not. Poverty Point was built by persuasion, by obligation, by a shared agreement that the work was worth doing. That is arguably the most radical thing about the site. Not the earth moved, not the trade routes, the organization itself. For 600 years, from roughly 1700 to 1100 BCE, the site flourished. Then something happened. The ridges stopped being maintained. Houses on them were abandoned. The radial corridors filled with brush. The great mound fell silent. The long-distance trade network collapsed. Copper stopped arriving. Steatite stopped arriving. The imported stones disappeared from the record. Within perhaps a century or two, Poverty Point was gone. Not destroyed, nothing was burned, nothing was massacred, simply vacated. The people did not vanish, they dispersed. They moved to smaller sites across the region, returning to a more mobile life. But the center, the gathering place, the pilgrimage site, the engine of continental trade, was never rebuilt. And nothing on the same scale would appear in North America for nearly 2,000 years, not until the rise of the Hopewell cultures. Why? This is the question that has driven archaeologists for 70 years, and there is no consensus answer. Several hypotheses are on the table. Each has supporters, each has critics. All of them remain unresolved. The first, environmental change. Around 1100 BCE, climate patterns shifted, rainfall changed, bayou courses moved. If the fishing and gathering returns declined even modestly, a population of this size could no longer be sustained in one place. The second, internal strain. Some scholars argue that large egalitarian gatherings can only hold together for so long. Without a strong central authority, the seasonal cooperation that built the mounds may have simply worn out. Exhaustion, not disaster. The third, a shift in trade routes. If the networks that fed Poverty Point were disrupted upstream, the center lost its purpose. Copper sources changed hands, steatite quarries exhausted, alliances realigned. The flow of exotic stone dried up. The fourth hypothesis is the most unsettling. Some archaeologists argue there was no external cause at all. They argue the people of Poverty Point simply chose to leave. A collective decision, a change of values, that they decided the great gatherings were no longer what they wanted, that they preferred dispersal, that they walked away. If that is true, and we may never know, then Poverty Point is one of the rare monuments in human history abandoned on purpose. Not conquered, not starved, not plagued, abandoned by choice, by a society that had decided to become something else. Let me show you one more thing before we close. Something small, something easily missed. Among the objects excavated from the ridges are tiny figurines. Most are fragmentary. Most are female forms. They are made of baked clay, a few inches tall, rounded, simplified, abstract. No faces, no clothing, just form. Archaeologists don't know what they were for. Fertility charms, lineage markers, ancestor figures, children's toys, all are possible. But they exist. Thousands of them broken and scattered through the living layers of the ridges. A human scale inside a monumental one. Because here is what's easy to forget when you talk about 5 million hours of labor. Real people lived those hours. Mothers on the ridges, weaving baskets for the work parties. Fathers carrying loads up the slope of Mound A. Old men and women who remembered when the great mound was only shoulder high. Children who grew old watching it rise. 600 years of this, 20, 30 generations. Lives spent inside a project larger than any single life. And when the project ended, when the gathering stopped, when the trade routes closed, those figurines were simply left behind. So what do we make of all this? What does Poverty Point mean 3,500 years later? It means the old rule was wrong. Monuments do not require agriculture. Cities do not require kings. Civilization does not follow one script. It means North America before Columbus was not empty, not simple, not waiting to be discovered. It means that in a bayou of northeast Louisiana, 1,000 years before Homer, hunter-gatherers built a continental capital. It means the textbooks most of us grew up with left out entire chapters, not by accident, by oversight, by the weight of old assumptions. And if you made it this far, you now look at the map of America differently than you did 20 minutes ago. There are more stories like this. Watson Break, Older and Stranger. The shell rings of the Atlantic coast. The Adena earthworks of Ohio. A continent full of monuments that most Americans have never been taught to see. All of them built before a single European arrived. Mound A still stands today. You can drive to it. You can climb the modern wooden staircase to its summit. From the top, you see the concentric ridges curving away beneath you. Faint now, plowed down, still legible from the air. You see the bayou Macon winding east. The same water the builders drank. The same horizon the builders faced. You can stand there on a summer evening and hear cicadas. Just as they heard cicadas, the light falls the same way, and somewhere beneath your feet. A clay cooking bowl, a fragment of galena from the Ozarks, a broken figurine with no face, left by people who built the largest earthwork in the Americas, then left it, and are still, after 3,500 years, not fully understood. No feathered headdress, no horse, no teepee. None of the images Hollywood taught us to see when we think of Native America. Just a hunter-gatherer city in Louisiana, older than Rome, larger than Stonehenge, built by people whose descendants still live in this country today. In the next video, we travel north, up the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, to meet the Adena and the Hopewell, the inheritors of the mound building tradition, the people who took what Poverty Point began and ran with it for 2,000 years. They carved copper into breastplates. They shaped pipestone into animals that look alive. They built geometric earthworks that would stun Euclid himself, and they too, eventually, disappeared, leaving behind a landscape of mounds that stretches from Kansas to the Appalachians. If you want that story, subscribe and stay with us, because the history of this continent did not begin in 1492. It began at least 20,000 years ago, and the people who lived here built things we are only now beginning to see. And all of this before Europe even knew this continent existed.